Denmark taxes its citizens more than almost any country on earth, over half of a top earner's income, funding free healthcare, free university, and unemployment benefits covering up to 90% of your salary for 2 years. And yet, in a national survey, 88% of Danes said they're genuinely fine paying it. Not resigned. Fine. Today, I'm showing you the 7 specific money habits that explain that gap. The ones that make Danes feel financially secure despite handing over more of their paycheck than almost anyone else in the world. Number 4 is the habit that quietly removes the single biggest source of financial anxiety most people carry without realizing it. And number 6 is the one that changes how you feel about every purchase you make, permanently, once you actually understand it. Here's the thread connecting all 7. In Denmark, a huge share of the financial anxiety most people carry privately. What happens if I get sick? What happens if I lose my job? How will my kids afford university? Simply isn't a private problem to solve alone. It's already collectively handled. That single shift changes what your remaining money is actually for, and it changes how you think about it completely. If this is already reframing how you think about money and security, go ahead and hit like and subscribe if you're new here. This channel exists to hand you the real system behind Nordic living, and it genuinely helps to have you here for the rest of it. Habit 1 is really the foundation. Everything else sits on. In Denmark, several of the biggest financial catastrophes most people privately insure against, a serious illness, a layoff, your children's education, are already collectively covered before you've made a single personal financial decision. Healthcare is free at the point of use. University, including for many international students, carries no tuition. Unemployment benefits can replace up to 90% of your previous salary for up to 2 years. This isn't a money habit in the traditional sense. It's the structural fact that reshapes every habit that follows. When the worst-case scenarios are already handled collectively, your remaining money stops being a private insurance policy against disaster and starts being genuinely, entirely yours to decide what to do with. Habit 2 draws on janteloven, the set of unwritten social norms found across Scandinavia that we've discussed on this channel before, often summarized, sometimes unfairly, as don't think you're better than anyone else. Applied to money specifically, janteloven quietly discourages the kind of visible wealth display that drives so much spending elsewhere. The car chosen to signal status, the renovation done to impress rather than to actually improve daily life. I want to be honest that janteloven has real critics, and the discouragement of standing out too much has genuine downsides worth acknowledging. But underneath the part that gets criticized is something I think is genuinely freeing. You're not competing financially with your neighbors, because visibly outspending them was never the social currency it is in a lot of places. That removes an entire category of spending most people don't even recognize as competitive until they stop doing it. Habit 3 is lagom, the Swedish word for just enough that we've covered before on this channel. Applied here specifically to consumption, not too much, not too little. Exactly what actually serves your life, no more. This shows up practically as a genuine comfort with owning fewer, better things rather than constantly accumulating. and a comfort with a modest home or car that would, in a lot of other cultures, read as a sign you should be doing better. In Denmark, enough isn't a consolation prize for people who couldn't afford more. It's a genuine, positively held target that most people are actually aiming for. Now, habit 4, the one I promised. And it's the habit that removes the single biggest source of quiet financial anxiety most people carry without ever naming it directly. The pressure to build a private financial buffer large enough to survive a genuine catastrophe entirely on your own. In a lot of places, financial security implicitly means enough savings to cover months of lost income, a major medical event, and your children's future education, all funded privately, because nothing else will catch you if it goes wrong. In Denmark, a significant share of that catastrophic risk is already absorbed collectively, which means the emergency fund a Dane actually needs is genuinely, measurably smaller than the one that same anxiety would demand almost anywhere else. This isn't a mindset shift you can simply adopt without the underlying system behind it, and I want to be honest about that. But understanding it does something important even outside Denmark. It reveals how much of the "you need 6 months of expenses saved" minimum advice is actually solving for a level of catastrophic risk that isn't universal. It's specific to systems where nothing else exists to catch you. We've covered the foundation, the social pressure around status spending, and the target of enough. What's left ties directly into how an actual purchase feels in the moment, and why that feeling changes once you understand what's already been taken care of. Habit 5 is a genuine cultural comfort with financial transparency that runs deeper than most places. Across the Nordic region, there's historically been far less shame and secrecy attached to discussing money openly than in a lot of other cultures. Salary isn't the taboo subject it often is elsewhere, and that openness does real psychological work. Secrecy around money tends to breed comparison and anxiety in the dark, where you're measuring your own situation against an imagined version of everyone else's that's usually worse than reality. A culture with more openness about money removes a lot of that imagined comparison because you're not guessing anymore. Habit 6, the one I promised, and it's the one that changes how a purchase actually feels. HYGGE as a genuine decision filter, applied to spending specifically, not just to home objects. We've talked before on this channel about HYGGE functioning less as an aesthetic and more as a filter for what actually deserves a place in your life. Applied to money, this means spending is weighed heavily toward experiences, quality time, and things that genuinely get used and enjoyed daily, and weighed much lighter toward status objects or purchases, made purely for how they'll be perceived by someone else. Here's the actual shift in feeling. Once you're asking, will this genuinely add to my daily life, instead of, will this make me look like I'm doing well, an entire category of purchases simply stops appealing to you, not through willpower, but because the question itself changed. A purchase evaluated against, does this deserve a place in my life, feels completely different from one evaluated against, will this impress someone? And habit 7, a national culture of genuinely protected time off, built directly into how Danish work life is structured. A standard work week noticeably shorter than in many countries, 5 or more weeks of guaranteed vacation, and a general cultural expectation that time outside work is genuinely respected, not quietly eroded by an always-on culture. This connects to money more directly than people expect. A significant amount of spending elsewhere functions as compensation for burnout. The takeout ordered because there's no energy left to cook. The impulse purchase that briefly relieves the exhaustion of an overextended week. When rest is actually built into the structure of daily life, rather than something you have to earn or fight for, there's simply less exhausted, depleted spending happening in the first place. Here's everything together. Catastrophic risk absorbed collectively rather than privately insured against. Janteloven, quietly removing status competition from spending. Lagom setting enough as a genuine positive target rather than a consolation, a smaller necessary emergency buffer because less has to be covered entirely alone. Real openness about money-reducing anxious comparison. HYGGE as a filter that changes what actually feels worth buying, and a structure of protected rest that reduces exhausted, compensatory spending. I want to be honest about the limits of this video because I think it matters. None of these 7 habits exist in a vacuum. Separate from the tax and welfare system funding them, you can't simply adopt, feel less anxious about emergencies without something actually reducing the real risk behind that anxiety. What I do think transfers, regardless of which country you live in or what your own tax rate looks like, is the reframe underneath all 7. Examine which of your own financial habits are genuinely serving your actual life, and which ones are compensating for an anxiety, a comparison, or an exhaustion that might have a different, more direct solution than more money ever could. 88% of Danes aren't fine paying over half their income because a number stopped mattering to them. They're fine with it because they can see, directly and specifically, exactly what it's buying them. And because so much of what money anxiety usually protects against, in their case, is already handled before their own decisions even begin. Tell me in the comments which of these 7 habits you find most interesting to think about, even if the underlying system doesn't exist where you live. I read every single comment. And if you know someone who's exhausted from carrying every financial worst-case scenario entirely alone, send this to them. Sometimes it helps just to see clearly what a different system actually looks like. I know the skepticism this video is likely to generate because I've heard every version of it from visitors and clients over the years. Denmark is small. It's homogeneous. Of course, a system like that works there. It wouldn't work anywhere bigger or more diverse. I want to take that seriously rather than dismiss it, because it's a genuinely reasonable point. And I'm not in a position to tell you whether this specific tax structure would function the same way in a much larger, more varied economy. That's a real question, debated by actual economists. And it's outside what I can responsibly answer for you in a video about home and lifestyle habits. What I can tell you is only what I've directly lived and observed. How this particular system functions for the people inside it, and the habits that grew out of it. I also want to acknowledge the other common pushback, because it's fair too. Isn't feeling fine about taxes just resignation dressed up as contentment? People get used to anything, maybe partially, but the Gallup number I opened with wasn't measuring resignation. It was measuring people who, when asked directly, could name specifically what they were getting in return. Resignation doesn't usually come with that kind of specificity. In my experience, Most Danes can tell you, off the top of their head, roughly what a hospital stay would have cost them somewhere else, or what their friend abroad pays monthly for health insurance they might not even fully use. That specific comparison, more than any abstract loyalty to the system, is usually what's actually underneath the satisfaction. Here's something I think about often, and it's less about policy and more about what I actually want you to take from this video, regardless of your own country's tax rate. For years before I really understood any of this consciously, I assumed the anxious, private stockpiling instinct around money that I'd occasionally seen in international clients, the constant low hum of, what if something goes wrong and no one catches me, was simply a universal, unavoidable feature of having money at all. It took working closely with families from very different systems for me to realize that instinct wasn't universal. It was specific to a particular relationship between an individual and the risks they're expected to absorb entirely alone. That reframing didn't change my tax bill. It changed how I think about what money anxiety is actually protecting against. And it's made me more curious, not more preachy, about which parts of that anxiety might be addressable in ways that don't require an entirely different national system. Community, insurance products designed well, simply naming the specific fear out loud instead of letting it stay vague and constant in the background. I want to end this honestly. I'm not asking you to feel differently about your own country's taxes, and I'm genuinely not in a position to tell you whether Denmark's specific trade-off is the right one for a country built completely differently than mine. What I hope this video actually did was something narrower and, I think, still useful, showing you a real, functioning alternative relationship between individual money and collective risk, so that whatever system you're actually living inside of, you can look at your own financial habits with slightly more clarity about which parts are serving your real life and which parts are just quietly absorbing an anxiety that a different structure might have handled differently.